In that forsaken place, blood must spill. Blood of your fellows. The Erdtree faithful.
They were never saints. They just happened to be on the losing side of a war.
Hello everyone, it's Rendon, and I'm not currently playing that much Elden Ring until the DLC comes out. Partially because there are plenty of other good games out right now, and also because I feel like I've really worn down the amount of builds and setups I feel inspired to make until we get more toys in Shadow of the Erdtree. One thing I decided to go back and play again was Sekiro, to unlock the last ending I never fully finished from when that game came out. So this video will be one part condensed Sekiro playthrough, and one part series of Sekiro lore-inspired Elden Ring invasions. For the build I am now pretty sure I will be taking into the DLC. Going back to anything I've previously played is something that's really rare for me, with the obvious exception being Souls games. Some people will and won't include Sekiro in that category, but I'm going to go ahead and emphatically say that I do. It may not have the same niche multiplayer component, and the combat system may be a totally new offshoot with different mechanics, but the dark fantasy and storytelling themes are all there, if not a little bit more upfront than other Souls games. Surprisingly, Sekiro may be my favorite lore story in all the games that have come out of this illustrious studio. The themes of immortality and sacred waters put in a fantastical version of what I think is Warring Era Japan, all in the familiar context of a falling realm, just hits exactly the right way. Naturally, playing Sekiro again got me into the lore, which made me want to make a lore build for Elden Ring. This tied in with my interest in wearing the Depraved Perfumer's chest piece because of the little mesmer themes and tie-in from the trailer, all combined into making the snake-eyed build you see here. It's an arcane build based off of the snake-eyed Shirafuji from the Sunken Valley in Sekiro, one of my favorite mini-bosses in the game. Arcane builds for me do about everything possible to avoid using bleed, because I cycle through different mental blocks about what I can use based on its popularity from patch to patch. That, and there are enough early Elden Ring game cycle arcane builds running around again, now that DLC is on the horizon. So this build focuses mainly on poison, with occult-infused weapons, which also occasionally uses some weapons with inherent bleed, like the Flamberge or the offhand Uchigatana. That's just for you, Rofo. The main workhorse on this build is the Omen Cleaver with Poison Mist, which allows me to buff a weapon that's occult infused, provide enough hyper armor to show Flaming Strike users how to be classy, and style on them simultaneously, all while also creating the visual effect of Juzo spitting poison onto his blade. Something I've been using for a while now as a way to complement the big heavy swings of greatsword and curved greatswords is that offhand Uchigatana, which provides a deterrent and mix-up for decently skilled players, not just letting me hit them with the Omen Cleaver's running R1s. Katana spam is probably a little bit too strong in Elden Ring, but as an offhand I find it's not too heinous, and can hit semi-reliably as a roll catch after a curved greatsword R1. The Omen Cleaver actually has the Butcher's Knife unique two-handed R2 chop, which comes out very fast and is great with jumping attacks. But I like the one-handed sweeping R2s for another roll catch option, which fits really nicely into the offhand Uchigatana setup. That and the running R2s one-handed are great for kind of mixing up on parry spammers. I usually find that while it's not perfect, if they're expecting running R1s, usually they will whiff that running R2 parry because the timing is just wonky enough to throw them off a little bit. Finally, back in the earlier days of Elden Ring, a player named Urgot was the one who really inspired me to play with curved greatswords in this way, using those big sweeping R1s into delayed R2 roll catches. Really, really nice way to use these weapons.
Ashina 流。流派というても堅苦しい決まり事などない。ただ戦に勝つ。その一時を市場とする剣よ。ネズミ狩りに 何よりお主の戦に役立てるがいい。
Before I keep going with the commentary on this, I want to make a brief kind of note about the Sekiro gameplay you're seeing. As you're watching this, there's not like an on-ball, perfect like playthrough of this. This is like my first comeback to Sekiro in years, and so I'm just showing you kind of the raw gameplay as I fought these bosses. Now these are when I beat the bosses, obviously, but I'm not beating them flawlessly, and I don't really care about that. I'm just kind of going through it, using the different shinobi tools and sword techniques that I really wanted to as I go through it. Now I play Sekiro in a bit of a weird way. Well, maybe it's not that weird, but to me, it's the way I've always kind of done it. I look at it in kind of the originalist way. I don't really use a ton of different tools and prosthetics like firecrackers and things like that. I like to just do my best to take the fights on, win with just kind of the pure posture system, sword techniques, maybe a shinobi tool here or there, not a whole lot. That's just how I like to play this game and beat the bosses. So now that I've got that little brief tidbit out of the way, and you kind of understand, I might be able to fend off some people being like, why aren't you not using, you know, this type of thing in the gameplay? But just thought I'd mention that real quickly. All right, back to the build. The first Ash of War option that I actually went with for the offhand Uchigatana was Poison Mothlight. It seemed like a decent pairing to go along with the Omen Cleaver's Poisonous Mist. I would try to proc poison on one or two Phantoms and maybe the host, and then go ahead and switch over to the offhand Uchigatana when they weren't expecting it to land that Poison Mothlight. And no one really uses Poison Mothlight, so that's kind of what I was relying on to just surprise people with and actually hit it. You really have to mind game opponents to land it well. It's not the easiest Ash of War to hit. It has a really long animation time, and it's a little bit telegraphed. But if you do hit, it does a very, very good bit of damage based on that poison proc that you got on them a little bit earlier on. But because it was not really working out as well as I wanted it to, I actually ended up switching the Ash to a different one, along with changing the look of the build for the second part of this video, which you're actually starting to see now, to be more in line with another Sekiro character for reasons that I'll discuss a little bit later on. I have another Omen Cleaver on this build that utilizes Raptors of the Mist for a little bit of a tricky switch up and provides some nice, what I think of as Nightjar vibes. There's nothing really incredibly fancy about this build, right? I've done the really complicated and thought out spell combo setup video with the Briars of Sin and Carrion sorceries. I've done my channel thesis and espoused my personal invader philosophy with the bomb logic video. That's not to say that I won't make more of these videos again when DLC comes out. I absolutely will. But this video is about a fun, semi-viable, and kind of interesting build that I'm playing with now, and to actually talk about how I tied it in with some Sekiro lore going back to that game. Before we go any further, I want to take a slight tangent to talk about something that's just a little bit personal. When I say the phrase, Souls changed my life, and the way I interact with video games and video game communities in a profound way, I'm really just kind of repeating something that most everyone has heard about the Souls genre before. When I first started uploading Dark Souls 3 videos over 3 years ago, I was doing it very much from the outside looking in. I was watching Saints videos and interacting in comment sections, but I hadn't found my way to Twitch, and I had no other connections or outlets to really share my Invader experience. I constantly strived to find inroads to connect with the people on the scene, but I had no real knowledge of how to do so. Because of this, I spent most of the life cycle of Dark Souls 3 as a largely self-taught red that only picked up little tricks here and there from YouTube. Fast forward a couple years to Elden Ring, and it's been vastly different. I've had the opportunity to be far more tied in with other invaders than I ever had in the previous game cycle, which several of you watching have been a big part of that, and just know that I will always be grateful for it. It's a really beautiful niche community that we're part of, and I love the absolute inspiring nerddom that's present here. I really hope that no one ever changes. This also makes me look back and consider really all that I missed out in Dark Souls 3. The knowledge, builds, and build crafting I never had access to and will never really be able to do because I didn't have the tools to truly make my mark back in its heyday. It really does make me a little bit sad sometimes, especially because now I can truly see how rich that scene really was. That being said, it makes my current drive really all the more clear. I want to do more. I've been wanting to do more. I want to make more builds find my own interesting setups, and selfishly, I want to make more content that serious invaders look at and go, oh wow, that's really cool. I want to try that setup. That's something I've never thought of before. I'm not ashamed to say that I want to have an impact now because I get so much out of this hobby, and I think a lot of people here probably would agree with me. I feel like an aspiring director at the Oscars, I really want to win that trophy because it shows I've created something worthwhile for my peers. Peers that I respect for the masterpieces they've already made in the past. Maybe that sounds a little bit pretentious, but I really, really don't mean it to. Now that I'm off that slightly too large and most likely too sappy tangent, I want to get back to the inspiration for this. Something cool that ties into the build from Sekiro lore is that poison is a tool there as well. Back in a time long past, the Ashina drove back an invasion of the Inhumanokami and their lightning with special sword techniques and the blue rust poison on the blade Sabimaru, which they were said to be especially weak to. So here we have a lore tie-in, with poison being used to counter beings using incredibly powerful lightning techniques, which I just turned in my head into anyone using certain kinds of builds in Elden. I also made a joke when the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer first dropped that we would see a million different Host and Phantom monk builds running all over the DLC after the new Senpo kick moveset was revealed in that trailer. I also said that because of this, I would make a build strictly dedicated to hunting down monk builds. Now at the time, I kind of made that as a joke, so I thought it was a little bit funny. But wouldn't you know it, the agents of Senpo Temple are called rats by the tangu of Ashina. So, gradually this build changed from the snake-eyed to the tangu. Everything stayed the same, including the use of the Spark Aromatic. Everything except the Ash of War on the offhand Uchikatana, which changed from Poisonous Mothflight to Impaling Thrust, emulating in the closest possible terms I could manage the perilous thrusting attacks of Sekiro. Usually I pair these in with running R2s as an attempted roll catch, and I bet if I played with the timing a little bit more, I could make it a fairly consistent one. But as it stands now, if I activate the Ash immediately after the two-handed running R2, either I will get lucky and punish a greedy player attacking out of hit stun, or if they dodge the initial running R2, the Impaling Thrust will catch them. Sometimes I will get really lucky and both will land, which the damage from a combined Blood Proc with a successful Impaling Thrust landing is usually enough to end a fight for good, with said now disintegrating Host or Phantom completely unprepared for how fast they were just shown a loading screen. So, again, gradually this idea became the monk hunting tangu build of the Shadowed Lands. Talismans I considered on the build consist of Great Jar's Arsenal, Bull Goats to allow me to have fashion I want and not be staggered by certain spells constantly like Ambush Shard, Carrion Slicer, Glintstone Pebble, and the less known but incredibly important Poise Breakpoint for Gelmir's Fury, in case I ever encounter Kryn on PlayStation at any time. It won't save me from his freeing magma shots though. Star Scourge Heirloom, and lastly, the Kindred of Rot's Exaltation is the only real quote-unquote build talisman for damage, because I've been inflicting poison so much in invasions. Like constantly people are just walking into that Poisonous Mist Ash of War on Omen Cleaver. It's just free damage. I considered for a while swapping Bulldoats for Perfumer's Talisman to buff the damage I have from Spark Aromatics, but I encountered too many spell spammers to allow them to easily stagger me with some spammable bullshit into their true combo of the golden level 180 buddies Blasphemous Blade R1. That, and Spark Aromatic already does an incredible job of generating space and easing pressure when fighting several people in invasions. People naturally tend to fear it, because that fear from what the damage could be is certainly earned, and that response to the fear is all I really need in utility from the tool anyway. Ranker Pots give me a harassment option that has been incredibly effective up until this point for making annoying Hosts and Phantoms come into my range and making those pesky passive mages constantly roll. While I don't love the Omen Smirk mask overall for this character, it does give the 2 extra strength I need to two-hand the ballista for that vital ranged option. That, and it's the only really close option to a Tengu mask in Elden Ring at the moment. Really hoping that Shadow of the Erdtree will give me some additional options in that respect.
おめえ知ってるか？このアシナの城にはな、外からのネズミがわんさと来てら、そういったネズミをよ、バッタバッタと切りまくるおっかねえジジイがいるんだぜ。
天狗の面か。
おめえも見たのか？
ああ、話だ。
そいつは驚きだ。よくまだ首がつながってるもんだな。
The incantations aren't really of note, with the exception of Bestial Vitality and Catch Flame to tease those very silly parry kings and queens. I do have Poisonous Mist as a joke that can at times lure unsuspecting and aggressive hosts to rush through it, thinking only a minor nuisance, only to get poisoned, proc my Talisman buff, and then be in my curved greatsword R2 range. Lastly, the poise I do have on this character with Bull Goats seems to be enough to tank some one-handed swings from larger weapons, and also certain Ashes of War while in hyper armor frames, so that's just a nice added bonus. It's a very simple and straightforward kind of build, and honestly, that's how I prefer to play right now. I don't feel the need to look for really stylish pseudo combos, or spend endless invasions testing different offhand main-hand setups for new and interesting ways to smack parties around. I just need to make a decent build that's fun and has the kind of theme I want to jump into the DLC with, and the wild new invasion environment we will find ourselves in when we get there. There are 8 new weapon types to be introduced, and we know great katanas will be one of them. Can you imagine weeb weapons and souls that will finally, firmly be in the hands of strength builds? Hopefully, anyway. I'm hoping for a moveset like the Samurai General mini-bosses scattered throughout Sekiro. It's really hard to tell though. Maybe From Software will surprise us with an even more interesting moveset from them. I'm also secretly hopeful that more Sekiro-like sword skills will be introduced in Shadow of the Erdtree. Something like the Ichimonji double, available as an Ash of War, feels a whole lot more realistic when monk movesets inspired from the same skill trees are already confirmed to be in the game. And that will be perfect for the Veiled Tengu. And yes, I know technically Ichimonji is available as an R2 in-game, but I would really prefer it to be available on more than one katana that has an int requirement on it. To be fair, I will probably end up making a monk build down the line as well, but not before I've made several other builds first. One thing I noted a lack of in the trailer were weapons closely associated with magic or the Carians, really kind of any magic at all. Besides a couple frames of the man sitting on the throne, who is probably a boss, but I'm secretly coping as an invasion faction leader, in a room that looks to be a reflection of the Carian study hall, we get next to no looks at specifically anything for those type of characters. I guess the gravity lance sword may count, but that looks to be more of a strength weapon overall. Maybe it's a quality weapon though, it could be a quality weapon. Wouldn't that be interesting? This makes me interested in doing, a Carian themed playthrough as well. But since Saint and around 10 other people I know are probably doing that, I want to do something different first. If you planned on leaving a comment, feel free to also mention the build you're planning on taking into the DLC. That way, if anyone is still on the fence, maybe they can get inspiration from one of the ones they read down there. It may seem like I'm trying to drum up engagement with that, but I promise my plans are far more simple and devious. I want to steal a build idea for the second playthrough. A close runner-up to this build was the Starless, the level 85 quality build that was featured in my Bomb Logic video using Godric's Axe with the soft swap Endure Dagger. I really like the simplicity of that build, and Godric's Axe itself was incredibly fun to play with. Following that, we have the Candleseeker with Giant's Flame incantations and the Cranial Vessel Candlestand, tied in with the Shaded Lion, which was the Red Mane themed knight character who has now undergone a darker makeover for the Shadowed Lands. All of these were great choices, and will feature their own updates from the uncovered goodies in the lands of Mesmer, but there can only be one first playthrough. This does make me wonder what the next phase for the community and content creation surrounding Elden Ring will be following June 21st. DLC for Dark Souls 3 marked only the beginning of a scene that thrived for years more after it. The difference here is that Elden Ring has already been out for 2 years. A lot of the hype and engagement with the game has waned with that extended and pretty unprecedented lack in content. I think it will really depend on the quality of the DLC and particularly multiplayer decisions that will end up shaping what the next couple of years will look like. I'm not expecting much, but then I don't think most of the community really needs much to get Elden Ring into a place where it can stay active for a good while yet. We won't be getting an increase in the player counts for multiplayer, but I still think some targeted story invasion zones or covenants, or just covenants in general with rewards, would be a really welcome addition. Please, From Software, for the love of God, bring back a respectable Blue Invader Covenant with its own rewards. It's a win-win. Hosts and Phantoms who don't want to deal with an invasion every 15 minutes will be able to share that attention with Reds who can now be targeted in solo invasions by Blues who have been chosen by the game to dish back the punishment they've been dishing. Hell, I'll become a shaded Blue of Mesmer myself, because I can guarantee to you there is nothing more attractive to an experienced Red than to become a Blue and get a chance to fight other good invaders for a lore reason in their own world. It's a slam dunk. Just do it.
Sekiro よ。お主、愛想はまるでないな。不思議と憎めぬやつじゃった。さあ、修羅に落ちる前に切ってやろう。
To close the chapter on this latest project of mine, I'd like to end on Isshin, on the final inspiration for this build. He spent the last days of Ashina plugging all the holes in the leaking ship that was the realm he originally helped bring about. There isn't a more bad man than Isshin. Most people will say that the Sword Saint Isshin is the best version, and mechanically I would agree, but I prefer old Isshin in this way. You're not fighting him in his prime. You don't get to fight him in his prime. This man is a legend who, with his sword mounted on a pile of corpses, built the land you now stand in and have been romping around in for like 15 to 20 hours. He's old, he's sick, and he will still kill you a dozen times over before you figure out how to beat him. The Shura ending was totally worth going back to get, and Isshin is firmly cemented as my favorite Souls character in the bunch. I hope we get more stories like this in the future from Software, and I will wait with bated breath for Miyazaki to pull out this formula again. Before that though, I'll see you rats in the DLC. Until next time.
赤色よ。ってやれぬか。